Good afternoon, everybody. This is Marty from Dawgs blog. I'm going to struggle through this report a little bit because I'm not real coherent. I'm on a lot of drugs and not feeling real good. But this is the noontime report of the afternoon session, the morning session of the Frank Carson et al. Trial. Jury was downstairs waiting to be called up, and they never were this morning. They sat down there 4 hours this morning until the judge finally about 3 hours, and finally about 11:30 the judge released them for lunch. What's going on is they're arguing the issue of Jack Abel's testimony. Remember, Jack Abel is the private investigator hired by Frank Carson to look into these issues going on with the investigation in the Corey Kaufman missing person homicide case. And it started out with Percy Martinez making an objection to the court that the DA wants to represent that Jack Abel was hired to obstruct the investigation. Jack Abel's testimony shows that Frank Carson hired him on 7/13/12. That was just prior to the search warrants on July 15th, 2015. Remember, there had been multiple interviews and a lot of things going on in the meantime. And it was on 7/20 of 2015 that Jack Abel had talked to Corey Brown and John Evers. And also the search warrant that they had served, all the search warrants that they had served on July 15, 2015 were all sealed and were not able to be seen by anybody. Frank Carson signed the contract that hired Jack Abel after the search warrant was served. The DA was saying it was prior, but he's saying there's no question that Frank Carson had hired Jack Abel, and so they're claiming privilege on whatever information that was brought up by Jack Abel. It is work product, and they're claiming privilege. Also, Marlissa Ferreira has put up an email that was dated July 27, 2015 in regards to cell phone information. It was not part of the Frank Carson Jack Abel work product. That was part of another and totally separate and independent case. Judge Aniga said that's not privilege. But Percy Martinez, and I didn't understand everything that's going on because I'm not real coherent, to be honest with you. Percy Martinez says it is privilege, allowing people to discuss an unrelated case that morphed back into this case, and some of the things that Jack Abel did. And he says some of it's related to Corey Kaufman, some of it's not. They were talking about a Valley case that Frank Carson had represented back then. There was a conviction, but it's being reviewed for a possible hearing to have the conviction overturned. Frank Carson, Percy said Frank Carson can defend himself, so that would give him privilege. He can be his own client. And this also is privilege in regards to the Valley case, because Marlissa Ferreira is, some of this information crosses over somehow. They didn't get real specific, the Valley case and the Carson case. But Marlissa Ferreira is also the deputy DA on that Valley case, and so they do cross over, and Marlissa Ferreira could be fishing for information on that case too. And it's all work product and should not be allowed. Jack Abel was the private investigator on the Valley case and on what they're talking about in this case. And it could give her a definite advantage in both cases. He was talking about on July 20th, 2012, that Corey Kaufman's phone was not responding to pings by law enforcement officers, and so nor could it be done by Frank Carson either to do the same. I don't know what that argument related to. I really don't. But the work product with Jack Abel shows it was not done in the Valley case, and now the Valley case has a new attorney. Frank Carson had requested discovery in the Valley case, and that request also included some information on the Corey Kaufman investigation, and basically the phone information, because apparently there's some crossover issues of some sort there. I really don't understand what it is. The privilege issue. Marlissa Ferreira says the privilege issue has been negated by an email to the private investigator. She says there was not privilege once it's sent out in an email. So privilege is gone between Jack Abel and Frank Carson. Only privilege is the attorney-client personal conversations. On 11/12/13, an interview by officers of Jack Abel, he made statements. So again, he had violated the privilege, and they're allowed to talk about it. They tried to get the information, Jack Abel's reports and such, and Jack Abel's attorney advised them that they need to request a subpoena. SDT is what they call them, a subpoena ducis tecum, for the documents of witness and defendant's statement in this case. There's not been proof of an attorney-client relationship between Abel and Carson. The contract with Jack Abel is between Georgia DiFilippo and Jack Abel. Frank Carson never signed the contract. The judge had ruled on this once before, but Percy Martinez advised that this is a motion to reconsider her ruling because Jack Abel has testified now, and he was hired by Frank Carson. He said it on the stand. I guess the last 2 days when I wasn't here. Also, they noted that the letter sent to the sheriff's office to not talk to Frank Navarro by Frank Carson. This was just prior to the office visit, you remember, in August of 2012. He says the contracts were signed after the search warrants were served, and Jack Abel's testimony confirms that he was hired by Frank Carson to talk to witnesses, and Jack Abel went to witnesses that were listed on the witnesses listed on the search warrant paperwork that they had available. Marlissa Ferreira argued that Jack Abel testified he did not know how Frank Carson's signature got on the contract, but the contract was with Georgia DiFilippo. There simply is no privileged relationship with Frank Carson and Jack Abel or anybody else in this case. Again, everybody likes to have the last word, so this really drug this thing out. Percy Martinez said Frank Carson can be his own client, and he can represent himself. He's allowed to do that under the Constitution in this country. Jack Abel said Frank Carson hired him for investigation of legal services and legal services. Jack Abel was asked by Frank Carson to interview all the witnesses that were listed on the search warrant. There was no requirement to turn over the private investigators' witness interviews unless it's going to be used to impeach a witness. If the defense, somebody's going to put up some impeachment information, then that information can be used. None of these witnesses have been called by the defense because the DA is still putting on her case. She's the one that put Jack Abel up. Marlissa Ferrer went into an argument asking the judge to take notice of all the witnesses and who have put Frank Carson as involved in the homicide. Frank Carson told Ken Berenger and Frank Navarro to put their questions in writing and then hired a private investigator. Unknown why Jack Abel didn't interview Mike Cooley and Eula Keys. Frank Carson wanted to know what people were saying to obstruct justice, is what the DA is claiming. Percy Martinez said the Constitution protects defendants against the power of the government. Defendants listed in the warrants, the addresses on all the addresses on 9th Street, all the defendants were listed in the warrants. The Poppincourt was addressed. Frank Carson's mom was in the warrant. Laurel Street address was in the warrant, which is the warehouse. And no one at the time knew about Mike Cooley, as it was not in that information. That's all come out later. On June 28, 2012, Kim Berenger talked to Christine DiFilippo and Kathy Grenolds. And Ryan Schmidt they were attempting to talk to him at the time, and there was no more information in regards to Mike Cooley at that time. The search warrant was sealed, and Frank Carson did not have access to the search warrant. And there was no information at the time that Corey Kaufman said he was going to the Frank Carson property that night. The testimony, that testimony came out on the stand from Mike Cooley during the trial, not at any other time in any statements or such. It was all done by interrogation by Kurt Bunch, like the pipes on the Frank Carson property were never mentioned prior to that either. Marlissa Ferreira is morphing the stories to make it sound worse than what it is. And Frank Carson was only seen on the Mike Cooley property. The altercations occurred in February of 2011. And that's when he was trying to find his books. And Frank Carson and Georgia DeFilippo both called law enforcement officers on those visits to Cooley property. And there's no reports with law enforcement in regards to the gate kicking incident or anything else, or the threats. The threats only came up through Kurt Bunch and John Evers' interviews. The People case is depending on drug addicts, thieves, con men, in custodies looking for a deal, etc. Frank Carson has every right to protect himself under the Constitution. Christine DiFilippo admitted Mike Cooley's statements of saying, Charlie O'Dell admitted, see, I'm a little goofy right now. Charlie O'Dell admitted to Mike Cooley's statements of saying that he got rid of somebody up in Sonora at a hog farm on March 29, 2012. Also, Georgia DiFilippo has not waived attorney-client privilege because she was also signed on that contract also. Jai Gohill argued the DA can subpoena a defense attorney. It's black letter law, and it's not supposed to be done as far as work product. She can subpoena him, but not talk about work product privilege issues. He says the statutes speak for themselves. If a witness is to be called, the information must be turned over prior to. This is a dangerous precedent that the DA is trying to set, and it is not allowed as the law reads now. Marlissa Ferreira said the defense claims are unsupported by the record. Percy Martinez argued again that they hired Frank Carson hired Jack Abel. There's no crime in hiring a private investigator if you have issues going on that you're being accused of on your property, and he can do his own investigation. Again, no crime has been committed. We took a break, and we came back. Remember, the jury's still sitting downstairs. We took about a 25-minute break, and when we came back, Eddie Quintanar, who had been sitting there earlier in court waiting to testify today, was brought up, and along with attorney Alonzo Grantford, and he was ordered back next Tuesday at 10 a.m., and they wanted to bring him back tomorrow, but they didn't think they're going to be done with Jack Abel, as they're still not done arguing some of this stuff. And the jury still hasn't come up to hear any testimony today. So he's going to be back next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Also, Judge noted she's going to rule on the Navarre issues next Tuesday. Jago has submitted a list of this, what he calls the Navarre lies. He says there's several points that he has made in a brief, and a judge is going to rule on that Tuesday. Judge Iniga said that a person is claiming privilege has the burden of proof to prove that privilege. Of course, if the law enforcement gets on the stand and claims privilege, they don't have the burden of proof. All they have to do is say it. Jack Abel was not sure how the signature, Frank Carson's signature, ended up on that contract. It is still in question who the client was, and apparently Jack Abel was not involved in any threats to any witnesses anyway. She started citing some case law, attorney-client privilege. She says it, but it does not apply when services by attorney are obtained to commit a crime or fraud. The party claiming the privilege, again, she says, has the burden of proof. She also noted that there could be an intention to abuse that attorney-client privilege if somebody's trying to commit a crime or cover up a crime or obstruct. The defense's argument was the focus of the witnesses testified already. Well, of course it is, because that's all they have. Defense hasn't called any witnesses yet. Judge Iniga is not convinced privilege has been shown. Frank Carson hired Jack Abel. The date is in question, and that's what she needs to figure out. And she has a researcher looking into some other case laws. She says it's something that she's never heard of before, and she's going to do some more research on it to find out exactly what laws may apply to it. Frank Carson hiring Jack Abel to get information is not clear if that's an obstruction of justice. Citing another case where the attorney-client is not there's no exception to it. There's research again. Attorney-client privilege. There's no exception to it. This is through a private investigator, and it's a kind of a really gray area. They've never dealt with this before. Probably going to be some case law coming out of this. Judge Iniga said she needs more time to look into the matter. It's an unusual situation that she's never seen before. Marlissa Ferreira claiming an attorney doing his own investigation is obstruction. They do it every day. I'm sorry. Attorneys do investigations. Marlissa Ferreira herself was involved in the investigation in this case. Judge Iniga is not sure how the DA gets to violate work product situation between, in this case, Frank Carson and Jack Abel. It's to be researched, and they're also going to look at the documents that Jack Abel provided to the court. They're going to be sealed, and the DA had subpoenaed them. But they're not going to be able. Nobody's going to be able to look at them at this point until the judge may make a determination to take a look at them in camera to see if there may be anything relevant. Jack Abel's attorney, and I'm sorry I didn't get his name, but he advised the court that due to some of the questioning that the DA made of Jack Abel on the stand already, that it appears that may have already read some of these emails and the information that was available. And again, he said that was based on the questions by the DA. Marlissa Ferrer stated she is unable to read the emails due to the encryption. So apparently they did try, but they have people like Steve Jacobson and John Evers who are gurus in these things. Judge Iniga citing case law, third party, they're still entitled privilege and third party, all this stuff. Some of it just goes right by me. And the judge also, at this point, ordered the district attorney's office to establish to her that they have no access to that email, and she specifically referred to Steve Jacobson. And Kurt Bunch called Steve Jacobson from outside the courtroom, and he told the court that Steve Jacobson has already deleted the email, so they have no access to that email, supposedly. Jack Abel, attorney, says he was not able to get all the information because he lives in Southern California now. Yeah, he was getting the information from here, so some of it he could get online, some of it he was able to get transferred up here, and so on. So there's not all information is available from up here. He did show Judge Zuniga the SDT, this subpoena ducis tecum, which is a subpoena. He was given by the district attorney's office, and the judge noted that it was very broad and not very well written, as which she seems to note in a lot of things in this case. That was it for the lunch. We broke for lunch. The jury got zero, not a zilch, time in the courtroom again this morning, and judge cannot rule as of yet, as she typically doesn't, on the Jack Abel issues, on some of those issues. So the DA is going into some questioning that's not part of what they're questioning right now, and what they're arguing about right now, and so that'll be be determined later on by the judge. That's it. I'm not sure there'll be a podcast tonight, but there will be a report put up. I'll probably do an audio report because I have to keep stopping the audio because I lose my voice. So I'll probably do an audio recording and put up the recording, as I don't think I can do it live tonight. But I'll put it up at 6 p.m.